Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Trulia, and today I am talking about my earlier video about the history of the non-Chalcedonian Schism, and we will be vindicating its content so that way we could see that what we cover, though of a serious nature, will be helpful to people for much time to come. And my goal is that it would be a resource for people and that those muddying up the waters to obscure their schism will not dissuade people from looking seriously at the sources and following up on this issue. And so on this topic, I want people to know my summary and agenda today. Oriental Orthodox apologists responded at extreme length to my dispassionate coverage of the history. And what this show is not intended to be, is a rebuttal of every possible statement that was made. And so I won't be doing that, though I will be defending how cool the shirt is that they were making fun of. They were making fun of the yellow shirt. And this is from the Pennsylvania Wild Turkey Federation. And so, I mean, I guess to each their own, but I just thought that shirt was awesome. And it was well worth bringing up that here I'm having a show on the history of something, and it's just lots of details and lots of citations on history. But instead, the concern is what color shirt I'm wearing, which is a good indication of really where they're coming from when doing something like this. Now, despite their authoritative and dismissive tones, they essentially conceded my thesis and retelling of events. So they don't like how I said it or what was said, but they don't call into question really that's what occurred. Just the ramifications of what occurred is different than what I think the ramifications are. And so that being said, if their response was written, it would be unimpressive and transparently insufficient. You couldn't, and we'll cover a little bit of this, but only a little. If you write out their arguments, they are incoherent and really not compelling because you don't get the tone, you don't get the insults, you don't get people hating on what really is an awesome shirt. I mean, come on, look at that turkey, So like without that, you don't really have a meaty rebuttal there. And so we will be talking about that. But again, this is not a comprehensive rebuttal of their attempted rebuttal. So just a little bit. We'll be discussing how their method, can't speak of the people. I'm not going to judge the people. But their method in trying to rebut the history is often erratic and quite emotional, actually. I would say transparently so. It's not substantive in content. And our case study in this will be a TikTok video that was made of what they were doing because I was sent this TikTok video from the Cambodian mission. Now, we're going to find in that TikTok video, there's inaccurate citations and deconstructions of arguments. So their rejoinders, they missed the mark. And that's what I think really comes out in this. And we'll be going into that nitty gritty. And a big inspiration of the show is the other Paul. So shout out to the other Paul. I'm going to show the other Paul how you do a response video the right way. And that being said, we will be discussing the scriptures on this question because I find a lot of these arguments spiral out of control the more and more distance we get just from basic scriptural realities. And so we'll cover that in just a little bit. But right before we do, if this show has blessed you, links are below. Please support the Cambodian mission. That's really the only reason I do this is evangelism. orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. If what I do gives you information that no one else is bringing to you, and this work blesses you, and this is, again, maybe not this specific show, but all the stuff that I'm doing, the amount of hours I put in, making no money, then bless the Cambodian mission, and God will bless you. Because I feel that good works are in a way in which we could attract the grace of God. And this is a good work. By all means, support Holy Trinity Monastery or some really important missionary work. orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate to support that missionary work. PayPal's below. What we really are looking for right now are regular contributors. So the Patreon, Even just $5 makes a big difference. So become a regular contributor to the Cambodian mission. And I want to remind you, anyone who believes but is not a missionary has not yet known the beauty of faith, according to Blessed Valerio Gafencu. So this is very important. If this means so much to you that you are watching this video on such a specific topic on someone else's response video, then this faith has to mean something to you. So put your money where your mouth is, or more importantly, your time where your mouth is. Become a missionary. That's why links below, not only to support missionary work, but become a missionary. orthomission.com, the Prophet Daniel Missionary Movement. So first things first, and this is important for the other Paul and for everyone else in the genre of response videos, just that other Paul is here. So not to pick on you, you said hello, so I'm going to pick on you just in a friendly way. How do we respond but honor God? I wasn't initially going to even respond because I felt, well, how do we do this in a way that's actually edifying to anyone? If it's just a matter of protecting my own pride, I'm a married man. I got enough problems to deal with where I'm going to worry about what other people's feelings are. I got to worry about my wife and my kid and people that are, quite frankly, more important. So how to respond but honor God, that this is something that's actually helpful to someone and helpful to those people. That's another thing. We cannot forget fear of God, which I think is. So much as pride is on the line, building up a platform, building up people's egos, that we forget we're talking to the things of God. The consequences are really, really big. And so we have to honor God in this, and we have to carefully discern and take time and pray about this and do prostrations, all these things. Now, everyone on all sides, so this is not to pick on agent and crew, because I think this is a bigger problem. So I was picking on my buddy, the other Paul, thinks they're Jerome, but they haven't translated the Bible and lived the life of a saint. So before you think that you're justified in these antics, take a step back and have a humble view of yourself, because I don't think you're going to be justified in these antics. It's very important to critique the argumentation, not attack the individuals, something that my interlocutors didn't do. And this is something that I will not respond in kind, and I refuse to, because their arguments are already so bad. I don't have to spend any sort of time thinking about what kind of people they are. It's kind of irrelevant, right? I don't know them. They don't know me. The quote Tupac, you don't know me, don't judge me, right? So I don't need to judge them. But I could judge their arguments for how poor as they are. And that's what we'll do. And so is a response even warranted? And this is a very big question. I actually don't think there really was enough there to warrant response. And that's after 9 hours. And I can't say I watched all 9 hours. So this is why this is not, I don't pretend it to be a comprehensive response. It's not intended to show that these people are awful or that there's nothing they do that's worthwhile or no good content they bring forward. That's not the point of this video. So I choose to respond for two reasons. One, the direct effect on missions, because someone from the mission actually said, this is concerning me. So, okay, now that this affects someone I know in the real world, I will take that a little more seriously. And the second thing is to maintain the overall integrity of my original work. And that's very important, because there's been nothing like this sort of comprehensive approach to the history of that schism. And I intend this to be a resource and an approved resource for many years to come. And so to defend the integrity of this work, hence the thumbnail that the work is vindicated, that's very important in its own right, because most of this is just go back to original video, all the content's there. I think that video is a genie out of the bottle moment. Once that genie's out, they can't put it back in. It's very clear they're schismatics canonically, that they don't have holy orders canonically. I'm not going to judge as God, but I'm speaking canonically. And that's why I could be calm about this. The calmer side is generally the correct one, because the truth's on my side. I don't need to make fun of awesome t-shirts or anything else, or accuse them personally of being whatever or calling them unintelligent. I don't need to do that, because the facts are on my side. Now, that being said, this is something where the other Paul has really inspired me, which is the scriptures and where they weigh on this, because we get into, church father battles that you kind of forget, like, well, what did scriptures talk about this topic? And I find in church history, and this is probably something that should be told of the show, that the church fathers are very comfortable with just basing the doctrines on the scriptures. It's when the doctrine gets more and more narrow and specific that then you need to lean on the interpretations of men of God that you trust. And everyone does this, Protestants do this at the point. But the point is, sometimes some of this stuff is so clear in the scriptures that it warrants, let's look at the scriptures first, which we're often not doing here. And so I want to point to people to 1 Corinthians 15:28. And it says, now when all things are made subject to him, then the Son himself will also be subject to him, the Father, who put all things under him, that God may be all in all. And so this is very important, that we realize there's in some way the Son himself is subject to the Father. And now this demands, well, how will he be made subject? It demands that question. How do we answer that? And in what way is the Son subject? Now, the church fathers have different ways, and I think some of these are compelling interpretations. So let's discuss them. One of them is through his body, the church. So this is a indirect sort of subjection, right? We are subject to God. We are Christ's body, so that way in Christ is subject. It kind of reads a bit like an eisegesis, but there's people more godly than me that had that interpretation, and so you should be aware of it. The other is through his divinity, because he's begotten the Father. The church fathers talk about this. Like, yeah, his divinity subject to the Father because his eternal, hypostasis is contingent upon the Father. And in this case, the subjection is figurative, right? It's not that he's literally submitting. It's just that he is eternally begotten of the Father. But also, if we go back to the actual scripture, this is an anachronistic interpretation because St. Paul's saying, now when all things are made subject, then the Son himself will be made subject. So clearly the topic isn't his eternal generation if we're just going to take the scriptures at their word. And so this leads us to, I think, a pretty obvious one, which is problematic for our non-Chalcedonian friends, which is he's subject in his human nature, not his divinity. And this is clearly the simplest interpretation. That is, I'm going to just emphasize scripturally holistic, meaning it avoids speculations that it's divine essence as opposing wills. I mean, like if the divine essence could have opposing wills, I suppose that then you could have one submitting to the other in the divinity, or that the divine essence is divided. None of us accept these things. Most magisterial Protestants don't accept these things. So I feel like we don't really have to put that much effort into thinking further along those lines. So him being subject to human nature is just simple. Now, simple doesn't mean correct, but we know that Christ has humanity that submits. There's examples of this. And this is something that St. Ambrose talks about in a book called On Faith to Gratian in book 5. And I just want to read this to you because he goes over the scriptures and how Christ submits. And I think this is highly relevant for us just to stay grounded on questions like this. And this is something that Patricia Clips could clip. St. Ambrose disproves really non-Chalcedonianism because St. Ambrose is a father that is accepted by the Council of Ephesus, and his works are quoted by the Council of Ephesus as intrinsic to their doctrinal Christological definition. What does St. Ambrose say? He says, see what care Scripture takes under divine inspiration, for it shows to us that Christ is made subject to God, while it also teaches us in what he made the universe subject to himself. And it so says, now we see not yet all things put under him, Hebrews 2:8, for we see Jesus made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, Hebrews 2:9. It shows, therefore, that he was made lower and taking on him our flesh. What then hinders him from openly showing his subjection and taking on him our flesh, through which he subjects all things to himself, which he himself is made subject in it to God the Father. So he's already saying the flesh is what's made subject. Let us then think of his subjection. Father, he says, if you be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Therefore, that subjection will be according to the assumption of human nature. Right in the Latin quoted on screen. As we read, being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself, being made obedient unto death. The subjection, therefore, is that of obedience. The obedience is that of death. The death is that of the assumed humanity. That subjection, therefore, will be the subjection of the assumed humanity. Thus, in no wise is there a weakness in the Godhead, but there's such a discharge of pious duty as this. So the subjection is not according to divinity, it's according to his human nature. See how I do not fear their intentions. That's the Arians. They allege that he must be subject to God the Father. I say he was subject to Mary, his mother, for it is written of Joseph and Mary. He was subject unto them. But if they think so, let them say how the deity was made subject to men. So this is why I say people should see my video, Ambrose Ends the Chalcedonian Debate. St. Ambrose is the wrong saint for Aegean and non-Chalcedonians to try to, through ad hocs and non sequiturs, claim teaches their Christology. He clearly does not. But I do think it's worth saying that Ambrose exegesis isn't, ma sola ecclesia. He's not just appealing to other saints or the authority of church. In this instance, he's just appealing to common sense that clearly it's Christ's humanity that is submitting here. Common sense isn't always right. That's not my point here, but it requires good argumentation, right? It doesn't require ad hocs and non sequiturs, taking Plato out of context and, other random Latin writers out of context, and things Aegean has done and tried to make Ambrose a non-Chalcedonian saint, which, he is, in fact, that he predated Chalcedon, but he clearly is speaking the language and the distinctions of Chalcedon. He just used human nature here. So we should be open for me being wrong and me being corrected, but it requires good argumentation, not just dismissive tone, saying you're offended or whatever. It requires good argumentation, not emoting to overturn. So this is why I'm insistent that Ambrose is the wrong hill for Aegean to die on. It's just the more he digs into that hole, it's just the worse it's going to look for anyone that is not already on his side, that just looks at it and goes, this is clearly not what he's saying it is. And this is why I wanted to start the video of this, because something new, because the rest's going to be typical response video. But just we get so caught up in who's the side you want or who's the personality you like that we just forget the scriptures. And the scriptures, I think, on this question are so clear, so that this was something that never should have led to a schism. Because just look in the scriptures, this human nature language that Chalcedon has is something that was accepted before Chalcedon by saints that the Council of Ephesus accepts, and it just makes sense with what the scripture teaches. It should have never led to the schism. So why am I attacked? Why am I awful? Why will this elicit, against their better judgment perhaps, response videos and personal attacks against me? Because what the saints say is so clearly on my side, they don't have better arguments. Look at what St. Ambrose says. Therefore, that subjection will be according to the assumption of human nature. I just don't think we could get much clearer than that. Now, let me make an apology for the remainder of this video. Ambrose is cited by the Council of Ephesus, as I already said, invoking human nature. And the book it quotes at length speaks of the same in the Chalcedonian sense. We have a whole video on this, Ambrose Ends the Chalcedonian Debate. And so you could, for more detail, go to that video. The thumbnail is on screen. That being said, the responses made to the video, the non-Chalcedonian Schism of History, are poor and they lack coherent content. So I'm going to try my very best to be respectful and just to deal with the content. And I think we'll be successful in this. But I can't call something that's incoherent, coherent, or great, or the best argument that was ever made, because it's just not. I'm not going to lie, but it's just not coherent. And I'm also going to apologize that I can't respond to everything. I want this to be useful to people. I respect your time. I respect my time. I have a job. I have a family. I'm not an unemployed, young man, which I think most of them are, where they have time just to emote about anything. I need to make sure this is useful, supports mission work, that it edifies you and edifies even them. That even if they disagree, they know that I'm being more than fair with them on a personal level, even if they don't dare admit it, that they at least know deep down that I am, because I'm thinking the long game. 5-10 years from now, we might be able to speak like gentlemen. Now, that being said, what really, to sum up their videos, is my impression. It reminded me of Shakespeare. It was full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. There's just a lot of, angst, but just not real content. There are 9 hours of videos, and it takes until part 4, where essentially the concession is made that what I said was correct, which vindicates the original video. It claims that the Coptic Synod, one, didn't violate the canons because having the majority of the consecratees being non-Egyptian bishops is okay. We're going to get into the details of these arguments. 2, that the Paulites consecrated a non-Chalcedonian bishop with 0 Egyptian bishops, which makes the number 1, the consecratees they were talking about before, the majority of Egyptian bishops, specifically a 1-0 majority. We will be talking about how compelling of an argument this is. Number 3, what is Craig really expecting them to do was said if there's only one non-Chalcedonian bishop was left in Egypt. Again, it's not much of an argument, but this was the point that was made. And 4, the claim is made every Melkite Alexandrian bishop since the 6th century was consecrated and constable by non-Egyptian bishops. Is this a relevant point? We'll be covering this as well. So that said, I'll tell you now before we deconstruct them, none of these are good arguments. If you wrote these arguments out as we just did, I'm going to click back, right? None of these look like very compelling arguments. You take the tone away, you write them out, they're not compelling. Mine are written out. I have the articles on the side of the screen, the political subterfuge of Chalcedon, which I think is very even-handed in dealing with even the saints on my side and some of the not so good things. The Miaphite Schism's inauspicious origin, I got the whole book. Rise and Fall of the Papacy. I write out my arguments. Doesn't mean they're perfect or I'm a perfect writer or perfect historian in any respect, but at least when you read them, they make sense. Subdeacon Daniel liked them for years, so maybe he does it now because it suits some sort of polemical need. Maybe he does still like them, but clearly I could write out coherent and cogent arguments. These arguments that I'm being posed with over 9 hours are not. You couldn't put these in book form and they wouldn't make any sort of sense. While my series on the history of the papacy with John Calrafi became the rise and fall of the papacy, that did make sense. So it's not that you can't have videos that are substantial in content. It's just their videos in response to the non-Chalcedonian schism of history were not. And this leads me to this observation. The apologists have to stop being content creators, giving you the latest drama stream. They have to value your time. You have other things to do in your life. If they're going to give you some Christian content, it should edify you, because just like reading the scriptures, our prayers, we only so much time in the day that if we're going to be creating content, it should edify you. It shouldn't just be content created for content's sake. We should also be valuing history and theology, right? Not get into all this personal stuff. And our Christian witness, because our example is a way of evangelism. And I think that is too often forgotten by all sides. And this is something I'm going to hold everyone's feet to the fire, that our Christian witness has to mean something. And I'm not the perfect example of this over the years. I hope that I'm improving now over the years. I've struggled with discerning this. So that's why I want to be very forgiving of these people. They are much younger than me. They've been doing this much less long. And so they'll have to go through this discernment process as well. So hopefully this gives some things to chew on for all of us. Now, that being said, don't make this complicated, right? I think this issue is very simple. Whether or not they have holy orders canonically, whether or not they're schismatics canonically. What does Canon 22 of Antioch say? Anything a bishop does without authorization in a province outside his jurisdiction is void, period, full stop. Those in schism are forced to strain their interpretations because the issue is cut and dry. And we'll get into that. They even admit there's nothing wrong with this very plain interpretation I gave you. What you see is what you actually get. And so that being said, it requires some stretching because this is pretty difficult to otherwise deal with and then admit your side is right, because canonically they are not. Now, I'm not commenting on morals. Maybe they're morally right. That argument could be had. Maybe they're right in the eyes of God. I'm not God where I could judge that. I'm just judging the canons. And that's where I am staking my claims. Now, let's get into deconstructing the actual arguments that waited till video 4 for Agent to talk about. which is one, the majority of non-Copt consecrations, didn't have Egyptians. Now, that being said, this is a goalpost shift, this emphasis on consecrations, because this emphasis on consecrations is not following the language of the canons, and it's not following what I was talking about in the video. So you could say, oh, you could have people that aren't part of the Egyptian synod taking part in the consecration. That's fine, but that doesn't address what the canon we just read stated. It talks about the approval, what was done. So if you have someone outside the synod making a consecration, the synod then must accept the consecration. Not very complicated. So that being said, the canon state the majority of the synod must approve of the election, not the consecration specifically. And there's Canon 4 of Nicaea, Canon 6 of Nicaea. They agree with me. This has to do with intra-synod acts. Feth and Agest, page 19. The canons state that the consecration must have the acceptance of the metropolitan. So, right, it's not that the metropolitan must consecrate. That's a goalpost shift. It's that he must accept with the synod. The canons nullify consecrations done without permission. And again, not the consecration, the permission of the local metropolitan and bishops, not just one and the other. And so look at Antioch Canon 19. It is imperative that a majority either be present or take part in the election by letter. It has nothing to do with consecrations. Now, the next argument is that we're right. The present Coptic Orthodox Church, which descends from this one Egyptian bishop with non-canonical Syriac bishops, this 1-0 majority follows the canons, which, honestly speaking, should we even address this kind of argument? It's anyone arguing this way, no offense, the argument is so pharisaical that, well, technically that's a majority, but here's the problem. If we're going to be that pharisaical and that legalistic, it's still wrong, because this canon stipulate in the plural bishops. 1-0 doesn't work. All right. Bishops are necessary to accept. So the canons deliberately prevent precisely the sort of consecrations that occur in fashions like the Donatists in Rome and the Novatians throughout the world. That's why those canons are made. So if you're following the ecclesiological rationale of the Donatists and the Novatians, that's a telltale sign that you're wrong and outside the canons. Now, for what it's worth, Egypt had a huge Chalcedonian synod in the 6th century that met canonical standards, hence the slur synodites. So it's not that there was this incapacity to follow the canons in this regard. They just couldn't get the person they wanted. Sort of like an election. In a fair election, they can't get X candidate to win, so then they do election fraud, right? You can say, well, this president was so bad, we needed the election fraud. That happened recently in the United States. So people make those sort of arguments, but the point is it's illegal. And in this case, it's not a canonical. Now, the patriarchs need acceptance of patriarchs. And this is another issue, which I was very clear. There's no canon on this. This is just tradition. It's in the Feth and Agest and the 424 Synod and Cilicia Ctesiphon that the judgment of patriarchs by the other patriarchs. And this is why, again, it's clear among all the historians that systastic letters were sent for other patriarchs except patriarchs. So I'm saying, yeah, there's no canon on this, but is this part of tradition? And canons are based on tradition? Yes. And for what's worth, Antioch 270 followed this model. How did they decide who the right bishop of Antioch was? The synods all made judgments on it. And so this is a way in which the synod's acceptance of their patriarch was made by the input of the synods and the patriarchs of those synods. So that being said, his third argument is we had no choice, right? We had no choice argumentation. To quote him, what is Craig really expecting them to do? Well, I will answer the rhetorical question because I have a very literal answer. Follow the canons or regularize with those synods who have. I'm not going to pretend everything that's ever happened in history on any side has always followed the canons. But at some point, that canonically regular side gets regularized. In the case of the non-Chalcedonians, their whole history lacks this regularization. So their whole history is not canonical. That's not an insult. It's just a basic observation of their history. So it's ultimately a Donatist type of argument. These people are wrong, they're evil, or they're heretics, or there's some combination. So we have no choice but to do this. That's what the Protestants said, the Roman Catholics. We have no choice because they don't have the gospel. These indulgences are bad. Go down the list. This idea that there's invalidity because someone's a heretic is a Donatist sort of argument. It's a Donatist heresy. The Donatists are condemned. No, it's the Pelagians that are specifically condemned, actually. Scratch that. But the Donatists, I presume, aren't accepted by the Oriental Orthodox anyway. And the nullification of orders and canons pertain to how a consecration is performed, not their orthodoxy, but how it's performed with the acceptance of synod or not what the bishop believes. So we had no choice. You did have a choice to accept who God would allow through regular means to become bishop. And we see all sorts of liberalism on all our sides today. Most people, most millennials and Zoomers aren't happy with that. We're more reactionary in our theology. But that said, we need to have the faith that God will let what's correct pan out over time. Now, that being said, large heresies have resolved in time without new synods being created, new parallel synods, that is. So like Arianism, the whole world supposes Arianism. The Arian, though, that's a bit of an exaggeration from St. Jerome. But that being said, it eventually resolved itself. Monothelitism and the Sixth Council. Monothelite, the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Patriarchate of Antioch eventually reconciled to the church. So this is an example where, it was decades, but you didn't need to make a whole of the synod like was actually intended after Lateran 649. Eventually it resolved itself. Sergianism. Rokor was out of communion with the Moscow Patriarchate. Moscow Patriarchate lacked actually canonical orders, but Rokor lacked really the Russian people, and there was a Russian synod in exile. So then there was eventually in the year 2000 a Moscow synod that conceptually denounced Sergianism. They just didn't use the word Sergianism. And they were then canonically regularized and re-entered communion with Rokor. And by the way, vice versa, Rokor re-entered communion with Moscow Patriarchate. And so this shows issues like that could be resolved. And sometimes, or they're not resolved perfectly, there's still things to work on, which I think with Sergianism, there is, if you know more details, how the modern Russian church works. But that being said, large heresies resolved over time. Now, that being said, we also see St. Athanasius and St. Meletius. They're out of communion through no fault of their own with some of the church, but they were vindicated and they didn't violate the canons. Athanasius had the majority of the Egyptian synod, not the Arians. Meletius had the majority of the Antiochian synod, not the anti-patriarch on the Arian side. And so this is something where eventually, even though it's after Meletius' death, he gets vindicated. It could be argued maybe he died in peace with Rome. But essentially with St. Flavian and after him, his side and his line of successors were vindicated eventually after his death. But the point is, it got resolved. And so this idea and this temptation that things aren't perfect now, I have to become true Orthodox, non-Chalcedonian, Protestant, and insert here, history shows that if we're faithful to the canons, faithful to the faith, that we live out our faith, that God will resolve these things, not always perfectly the way we like it, but they'll get resolved over time. So anyway, we have the fourth argument, you do it too. So if you do it too, then that means it's okay. But the problem is this is a deflection and not a logical argument. So for example, if, I don't say that they do, but if Eastern Orthodox lacked holy orders, it doesn't give the Oriental Orthodox holy orders. So if you do it too and that makes you invalid, doesn't make you valid, right? So like I could respect this argument from, let's say, the other Paul saying, and this is something I'm surprised Protestants don't do more serious research on, like invalidity with the apostolic churches following their own rules. Interesting video there, other Paul. But that being said, you could use that argument as a Protestant and go, they're saying all this stuff, you need apostolic succession, but their orders by their own canons makes them invalid. That person could make a good point without, cutting themselves at the knees because they don't believe in the validity of these orders, but we do. And so just imposing that, well, you do it too, that thereby that fixes it for us, doesn't really make a point. It's a point that could be made, but really not to the polemical satisfaction, the Eastern Orthodox, the Oriental Orthodox. It's predicated upon canons invalidating people based on non-local bishops taking part in the consecration. So he's saying that, well, the Melkites use non-local bishops in consecrations, Constantinople, so therefore they do it too. If we do it, it's okay. But the problem is this is part of that goalpost shift, which actually makes this not a compelling argument. Why? Because there's the synod that's local, like, for example, the patriarch left on the Chalcedonian side when the Muslims took over, which is covered in the original video, the non-Chalcedonian schism, a history. But there still remained resident bishops there. And so they would eventually, that synod, though small, did accept a patriarch that was appointed by Constantinople, which does meet the actual canonical need that the majority of the synod accept the patriarch. Right. So this isn't a problem. I don't think synods and exiles is a problem. A interesting argument could be made, again, like some like the other Paul or Protestant, they want to go down that road. But all of us have had this for some time with the Oriental Orthodox, like in Antioch. No one's in Antioch anymore. They have a patriarch of Antioch in Damascus. We have a patriarch of Antioch in Damascus. So we all accept synods in exile. But I think in the beginning of church history, when the church was kicked out of Jerusalem, we already had that with the Palestinian synod there. So the synod in Alia and all that, this is something that was already accepted, not a deal breaker, like in the first and early second century. So being that's the case, I just think that the history of synods in exile, whether it's Rome and weren't they in Lyon when there's the Roman captivity in France, and other instances where, let's say, after the Muslim invaded, you have bishops of Alexandria in Constantinople for a time, or during the Crusades, you have things like this. This has happened in history. It's not a deal breaker, but is it good? No, I'm not claiming it's good. It's just everyone has it. And if it invalidates people, which is worth a serious look into it, the history is very tenuous. I've looked into it. I think it's a tenuous history. I've said this years ago. So sorry, copeaholics, as I like to say. The church history, the Roman Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox, the Oriental Orthodox are not so neat and tidy. We have these synods in exile, but I affirm it. I think it's from the first century. I don't see it as a problem. So now let's talk more broadly. Why the deflections from Agent and crew? They ultimately cannot account for the transparent fact that they originate in a schismatic sense, that their own canons, again, it's not the name call them, their canons stipulate would invalidate them, right? That's why there is anger. You don't hear me getting very angry or making fun of their clothing, or we'll get into fake conversation pieces that are then made fun of and things like this. They are essentially making Humpty Dumpty ad hocs. And I mean Humpty Dumpty because he broke and you can't put him back together again. So they're just come up with any sort of argument. We just went through that list of 4 different arguments. None of them are very cogent. But of course you have to, because you have to deflect and come up with these ad hocs to deal with the fact that you are schismatic according to your own canons. I mean, that's a pretty troublesome thing to deal with when you follow canons. Protestants don't. They don't have to deal with that, but Oriental Orthodox do. And this is why I believe they can't simply make a positive, consistent case. I mean, I challenge them to do so. I have a whole book. This whole book is really not about the papacy. It's a positive case on Orthodox ecclesiology and where the Roman patriarchate fits into it. That's what the rise and fall of the papacy is about. One person gave the suggested title, The Orthodox Papacy, which would be an interesting one. But that being said, why can't they do this? Because they could only respond, because they cannot canonically make the case that they're a canonical church, because they transparently violate these canons. Now, I didn't take a time machine and ruin their canonical interpretations, right? John Attella, one of their saints, as I quote here, and we'll get into the response to it, says flat out, canonical bishops gathered around him, John, and said to him, what canon law allows you to do the thing you are doing, right? Making these, doing consecrations of priests without the acceptance of the synod, outside of his jurisdiction, by the way. And he said to them, when there is a state of confusion such as this, the church does not observe the exactitude of the canons. All right. And so John admits to violating canons. I'm going to take a time machine and ruin their canonical interpretation. I'm just repeating what is said here. Now, that being said, simply schismatic is what he called himself. I don't know his real name, so I apologize. Invokes the original Syriac of the passage, which hopefully the AI got right. I don't know, but I presume it's correct. That the alleged admission of violating the canons is about civil law. So his translation is, what law allows you, canon does mean law, by the way, but what law allows you to do what as you have done, he said to them, when the church is in turmoil, it does not scrupulously follow or observe the laws, as you know, and are able to learn how scrupulous was the one of blessed memory, Eusebius of Samosata, or the great Athanasius, or others like them. So the argument is his argument, I suppose, is they broke the civil law. Eusebius and Athanasius broke the civil law, so it's okay if I break the civil law. Because his argument is trying to avoid the fact that he's just admitting to violating canons. Now, if you keep going the passage, which I can't all fit in that screen, John admits to disobeying his patriarch. So is a patriarch the wielder of civil law or the wielder of ecclesiastical law? And are these canons about the patriarch or is civil law about the patriarch? Sometimes civil law is about the patriarch, though I believe Justinian's novellas are a little after this. But that being said, John admits to disobeying the patriarch in the passage. So contextually, law, as in canon law, seems to be what's being referred to. The life's contextualization, this idea that desperate times call for desperate measures, which is seen as positive in the life, proves my point. This idea that, yeah, we could break civil laws, I guess, could be consistent with this. But I think a little less compelling. Someone says, like the stream, guys. Yes, please like the stream, share the stream. And if this has blessed you, bless Church Cambodia, become a Patreon member, $5 a month, or even just PayPal, $1 makes a difference. Please support the mission in Cambodia. Now, I think it's slander to say that St. Athanasius violated the canons or the civil laws. And I think to even cite Athanasius, only the former even remotely makes sense. Because Athanasius, when he was accused of breaking the civil law, was that of murder and of stopping grain shipments to Constantinople. And I can't imagine John Attella as saying, well, Athanasius murdered someone, so it's okay if I do it. I mean, clearly that's not the case. So the idea is the canons, that Athanasius didn't observe these Arian synods. And I think it's slander because the Arian synods weren't canonical. The Arian synods didn't have the majority of the Egyptian synod. Neither did they have the acceptance of the other patriarchs, such as Rome's. Arian bishops often weren't resident and they weren't local. They were essentially fake synods in Constantinople that stood in for these other synods. Often, not all the time. Sometimes they were in exile and they went back, and it was very political. But the point is that this idea that Athanasius violated the canons or laws is ridiculous, but much more ridiculous he violated civil law because he was accused of murder. And clearly, John Attella is not approving of murder. But Eusebius Samosata, just so you guys are aware, worked with the canonical patriarch Meletius and the synod. So he didn't violate canons either, but he certainly wasn't violating civil laws. He was, again, just not observing the Arian contra synod. He was just observing the actual canonical synod. And this shows a consensus-based ecclesiology. So that being said, the video claims John is speaking of civil laws, and I just laid out, I don't think this makes sense with any attempted connection to Athanasius or Eusebius against Arian synodical factions. Now, again, I didn't take any time machine, and I'll make this screen a little bigger, where the Syrians and Theodosians pick Theodore to be Bishop of Alexandria. And so we see this quoted by John of Ephesus. Again, I didn't make him say this. This is what John of Ephesus says, non-Chalcedonian bishop of the city of Ephesus in the 6th century, the earliest historian, really their most important 6th century voice on the origination of the Coptic Orthodox Church, and also the, I would argue, also the Syriac Orthodox Church. That said, he states, and this has, in fact, happened to the wise clergy of Alexandria, for they were by no means men of inferior merit, or without knowledge, had not the gall of anger agitated them, and wrath made them stumble in their, the Peterites, hasty and uncanonical proceeding. When the synodal letter reached them, informing them that a bishop had been consecrated for them, by those who were Orthodox like themselves and members of their communion, because owing to the urgency of the times, it was done without their vote. So he's calling, again, the Peterites, those who became the modern Coptic Orthodox Church, uncanonical. So we have this, not me making it up, not me being a meanie, him saying a parallel jurisdiction's uncanonical. And again, I took no time machine. This is their own historian who states, again, ancient historian. Nevertheless, they prevailed on Peter of Alexandria in their savage violence, audaciously to pronounce sentence of deposition against him, Theodore of Alexandria, in violation of all canonical order, by which, in fact, his own consecration was illegal and invalid, inasmuch as he was the second appointed to fill a throne already occupied, a thing which the rules and canons of the church forbid. So my interpretation of canons isn't cope, it isn't anachronistic, it isn't some sort of desperate polemical argument. It's just clearly the historical argument of people understood things, and I'm just bringing it to light. That's all I am doing. Now, they actually make a response to this, which I think is very telling. And maybe they have several responses to this. I purposely went to what I thought the most salient voices, John Attella and John of Ephesus, and looked to see what did they say specifically to what they said. Here's what was said. And I listened to it more than once, twice or three times. I think there's at least three times to make sure I didn't screw it up. And it was stated, we're actually in disagreement with John of Ephesus here. So they're saying he's wrong because they must be canonical. But then 2 sentences later, they say, but it's the reason why we reject any and all instances of male patriarchs. I'm going to repeat. We're actually in disagreement with John of Ephesus here. But it's the reason, his interpretation, why we reject any and all instances of Melkite patriarchs. And this is not a misquote. They disagree, then affirm canonical interpretation, emphatically rejecting Chalcedonians. So they're saying I'm right, just not when it applies to them. Again, that's why I write this out. It doesn't look that impressive, but when people hear the voices, the emotional things, and the slurs, it sounds serious. But sadly, there's just not good content there. The force of my point is affirmed. The canonical interpretation I put forward is not an eisegesis, but accepted by non-Chalcedonian authorities and even themselves, at least that point. John accepts the Egyptian Synod when it was reunited, by the way. So they point this out at some other point, but as I talked about here, that's just regularization. The Nicene canon does have the novations. So yeah, there's schismatics that violate the canons. They become regularized. No one is opposing that. That doesn't make them canonical. It just corrects them by entering them to the canonical church. And this is something that's never occurred for the non-Chalcedonians. This is why canonically they don't have holy orders. Now, consider this 2023 article. And it's about what the Ethiopians believe about the canons when the Eritreans make a second synod in violation of the canons. On January 26, 2023, the Holy Synod of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, in its extraordinary meeting convened in Addis Ababa, excommunicated 3 archbishops and 25 of 26 bishops. The 3 archbishops were accused of illegal ordination. One of the appointees repented before the synod passed the decision, and in so doing, breaking the ecclesiastical dogma of the church and the laws of the Feth and Negest, a legal code first compiled by the Coptic Orthodox Church in Egypt, and then adopted and adapted and expanded by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in the 15th century. And this is in the article Crisis and Schism in the Religion Unplugged website. So again, I didn't take a time machine. I wasn't there in Addis Ababa. Their own bishops, not maybe their YouTubers, interpret the canons as I do. And this is why this is very problematic for them. Now, let me give a response to a real world concern. And this is the TikTok video that was sent to me. And this video was in response to I making a video demonstrating that canonically the Oriental Orthodox lack orders. And in that order, it in that video, it mentioned that the Oriental Orthodox instigated violence, and the Oriental Orthodox TikTok video claims that a source I cite on the issue is not pertaining to on an issue not pertaining to this holy orders question, is presented the exact opposite of what really states, right? So essentially, like, I lied, or I'm just neglecting the sources, I'm negligent or something like that. And for whatever reason, that means the Oriental Orthodox suppose really do have holy orders, so this vindicates them somehow, or just simply it's just meant to be a takedown of me or something like that. But here's the truth. The truth is that the source I cite and the source it cites, because we're going to have to differentiate between these two things, does state the Oriental Orthodox instigated violence as I contend. So I'm not wrong at all. But I didn't know about Chalcedonian retaliation. So I am wrong in omitting that because I just didn't know, and I'm going to explain why. Because I like to be an open book. That's why I've published errata, and I will continue to do so. And that's why even in the non-Chalcedonian schism a history, I have only 2 parts where they identified actual errors, little things that come up that show you, here's the answer, here's where you can find it. Now, I will say this short video encapsulates their problematic approach, which I've seen consistent. And again, about the hour of stuff that I saw, I didn't watch all 9 hours. So that being said, this friend from Cambodia, as I said, one of their first converts, sends this TikTok video. The TikTok video says, I miscited a quote. The quote's a different source in full, which I find strange, and accusing me of misciting something. And that my own source debunks me when it's a different source. So that's problematic. It asserts I am arguing that the quote it, the Orthodox clergy equal BLM, which is emotional appeal, right? I'm wrong, because look how outrageous this is. Now, it's not something I actually said, but it makes this emotional appeal to try to convince you of their side. It implies I'm being, to quote it, very mean for allegedly comparing our monks and our clergy to BLM. So we are going to see that expanded. And then I'm, to quote it, hypocritical because the Melkites were violent, and a quotation of an alleged scholar. And we're going to cover all this in some sort of detail. These are not good arguments. I mean, it's a TikTok video, so I'm not like very disappointed. And if you're getting your theology in TikTok, that's disappointing in its own right, but these aren't good arguments. It's based on ad hominems. It's nitpicky. It's very feelings based. You know, he called our people a name, and he's very mean. It's like we were all once the age where these sort of feelings arguments made sense, but I just don't think it makes a lot of sense at my age. Now, it mishandles 2 quotes in their content and purpose, which makes it, even from a content standpoint, worse than useless. And it's not worth responding to. If I did not receive this from the mission, I wouldn't even be talking about it, but it's at least now a case study of the argument's integrity. So we will do that. We have, I'm the miscited the quote in question. Did I miscite it? Well, let's look at the actual quote that I quoted. So this is the same slide. Evagrius reporting eyewitness accounts describes the ensuing violence between the anti-Chalcedonian monks who arrived in Antioch from Syria Prima and the largely Chalcedonian populous city who slaughtered their opponents. And I wrote, analogous to BLM busts into town. All right, so now let's look at the quote in more detail. All right, I expand it from Haywood Severus, which is where the quote is from. And it's from page 10, and it states, the church historian in red is what I quoted on screen. Evagrius reporting eyewitness accounts describes ensuing violence between anti-Chalcedonian monks who arrived in Antioch from Syria Prima and the largely Chalcedonian populous city who slaughtered their opponents and threw their bodies into the river Orontes. Such violence flew in the face of Anastasius's Irenic policies. Flavian was forced to leave his patriarchal throne and was banished to Petra in present-day Jordan. The way was clear for Philoxenus' party to put forward the patriarchal candidate of their choice, among Severus. So you could see the context there, and I'm going to explain why I had a misinterpretation of retaliation, not the meat of the passage, but of the retaliation portion. In red says, and the largest Chalcedonian populace of the city. I read this whole issue on Prima and that parenthetical statement as a parenthetical statement. Why? Evagrius is a pro-Chalcedonian source. He's not writing this down to slam on the Chalcedonians. That's not the point of this passage. And Haywood's point is that the episode led to Severus' ascent into the Patriarchate. So I inferred this, I think with some justification, as a parenthetical statement that the not Oriental Orthodox, that the non-Chalcedonian monks went in and started killing people because Evagrius is against these monks. And this is what led to Severus taking power. I'm one man and I made a mistake. I am sorry. There are 4 to 5 men and they actually made a much more egregious mistake. And I'm going to point out exactly what it is. Now, they claimed I miscited a quote. And they proved this by quoting Evagrius' history from Tertullian.org because it's open source. Now, before unpacking what that source actually says, I did not miscite the Haywood quote. You just saw it on screen. Taking the primary source cited by the secondary source isn't proof I miscited it. My own source didn't debunk me. You needed, at least, at minimal, extra content from Evagrius to even attempt to do that. Now, I misinterpreted the Haywood section right on screen in red in the previous slide, in part, and I didn't obscure it. So there's not anything honest I'm doing there. All that was on screen, including the red. The overall point of Haywood and Evagrius is the same as I assert, as we're going to see the exact opposite of their conclusion. And that is very important. So let's see. The actual quote from Evagrius with the Greek. Roused at the indignation manifested by Flavian and the violent urgency, or literally in the Greek, with great violence. The actual Greek word means violent impulse or assault. You could look at Acts 14:5, how it's rendered in a source we all accept, of the monks. The people of the city made a great slaughter of them, so that a very large number found a grave in the Orontes, where the waves performed their only funeral rites. So the monks entered the city with great violence. So the Chalcedonians responded to violence with violence. That's the point of the passage. Now, Evagrius claims the monks with great violence entered the city. That is obviously analogous to BLM. I mean, I'm not wrong. BLM would violently enter cities and cause riots. But here's the difference. The response to this violence in recent American history was that the people didn't kill them, right? They just kind of laid down and took it, while back then, the response to the violence was they killed them. You're trying to kill us, we're going to kill you. So unlike the restrained response to rioters in the USA, the people in Antioch had more of a backbone and ended up killing these guys. And if we're people in Los Angeles or wherever else killing BLM, probably everyone would be in support of them that's watching these videos because we don't really have a liberal crowd. Now, is that the most Christian response? Or is the restrained response the more Christian response? Romans 13 doesn't apply to vigilante justice. So I'm not going to go justify what these men did in Antioch, nor am I going to justify that we should have had a more violent response to BLM. But I'm also not going to say the right thing to do was to lay down and take it. All right? I'm not a spiritual authority, so I'm not going to actually take any stance in these things. I'm just going to say that the people listening to that TikTok video would already agree that if people are coming to the city that are foreigners with violence, that to respond to them with violence would have been justified. After all, the personal attacks on me and the rhetorical attacks on me are essentially a non-violent response to me to be as aggressive as possible without physical violence. That is really the point. And so if they feel justified in that, then they're not really all that different from these people in Antioch that responded this way. Now, I want to be fair. So to be fair, violent urgency in the translation at Tertullian.org doesn't sound like literal violence read a certain way, but it still sounds like an obvious provocation. But as we just showed with the Greek, it is pertaining to literal violence. And we have, Craig, we demand vigilante justice, and a lot of people do. And again, I'm not going to condemn vigilante justice, but I am also not going to say it's technically the Christian response. I think God wants us to hold these things in tensions. We're not justified in a lot of these moral situations, and there's really no good decision in a lot of these situations. But that's a bigger topic than this. So they allege that I claimed that Orthodox clergy, the Oriental variety, equal BLM. This is an emotional argument. It's not a substantial or content-based argument. And even still, it's still false. Monks are not clergy. So for me saying these monks cause violence and they were like BLM isn't me insulting clergy because monks aren't clergy. So then dishonestly, the accusation gets expanded to say, I said Orthodox clergy and monks are like BLM. So, right, just saying Orthodox monks, which then at least would have some basis in fact, it's added and monks to make it sound like a little less false. And this is just not honest argumentation. It's just honest argumentation. Now, what I'm not saying is Subdeacon Daniel or Agent are liars, or they're bad people, or they're evil, or they're ruthless, and they'll do anything it takes to win a polemical argument. I'm not getting to that theatrics. I'm just dealing with the argument, and the argument is dishonest. And that's transparent. Monks causing violence in Egypt, Ephesus, Jerusalem, Constantinople, etc. It's a scholarly trope. It's not like I'm some wacko for bringing this up. It's all over scholarship, and for good reason. It's a part of history on all sides that is regrettable and unchristian, and I think Islam was God's judgment against exactly this sort of behavior on both sides. But the point is, their slur is an attempt to make me, to justify their disrespect towards me. And I want to bring this up is they want to justify treating me disrespect. This is not, oh, poor me, you hurt my feelings. Because I think people are realizing this video, my feelings are not hurt. I'm being pretty calm in this. It's just not a substantive argument. So if you're trying to make it like, oh, we could call Craig names to make it sound like our side is right, it just feeds into the fact that their argument lacks good content. And I am offended by its lack of content, not by how it's treated me. So a little bit, the fact they hate on this shirt, I have to say. I mean, come on, guys. I got to show it again. You know, the Pennsylvania Wild Turkey Federation. This is an awesome shirt. Why were they making fun of this? I don't know. Maybe they're against hunting. I'm sure they're not. But, right? I could have fun in a non-mean way, right? That is possible. Apologists out there. Now, we have, I mean, I would never take a knee in the same sense as BLM was demanding it for someone. But yeah, but would he drown them in the Hudson River? I mean, I think that's the larger point that maybe we shouldn't do. So that being said, I'm very mean, supposedly, right? But I also have hurt feelings. So I'm mean and rhetorically aggressive to these people. But at the same time, they want to pose that I am effeminate with hurt feelings. There's already like this contradiction they're posing, but I was calm in the original video. I was calm talking to Subdeacon Daniel in private. We're going to talking to his priest in private who called me on YouTube. I did community posts, said, please no one insult these people. I think I've been pretty calm. I don't think I'm the mean one or the hurt feelings one. I've not ad hominem them, but their arguments hinge upon ad hominems. My response is to their poor argumentation, as you've already seen here. And so that being said, one, I'm evidently not the one with hurt feelings, but here's something I see too often in apologetics in their videos and other apologists. You disagree with me, ergo you offended me, or ergo you lied. But no, I disagree with you. Here's why I disagree. Not you offended me. It's like this escalates too fast into something very personal because there is some sort of intellectual disagreement. But I will say the one who lacks an intellectual response reveals they don't have a good intellectual response. Now, I want to point this out because they decided to talk publicly about this, and I'm old school. I like being an open book. I'm too much of an open book. But if you tell me something in confidence, I keep it in confidence, even if it's to my detriment. It's a New York thing. Now, that being said, Subdeacon Daniel's priest reached out to me. And he reached out to me to say the way they were talking wasn't Christian. The way Subdeacon was talking wasn't Christian. What they're doing was wrong. I disagree with you. You're wrong, which is good. I actually appreciate someone's like, I think you're a total heretic, but what they were doing was wrong. And that was pretty much the conversation. A very sweet guy. And, you know, hopefully, like with all these people, I'm a normal guy. I hope they, you know, sit down, have dinner one day if I'm in town, that sort of stuff. So he reached out to me with exactly the same sort of moral concerns that I have about these people. So it's not me reaching here. His own priest reached out to me about this. Just like, I'll just say this, and I won't get into more details. Agin's spiritual father spoke to me about this. And I forget, I think Subdeacon Daniel wanted me to talk to him, and then he gave me his number, and I forget who called who first. But it wasn't something I was reaching for. I'm not trying to get into their personal lives. That's not me. All right. And he had the same concerns. So this is not me being crazy. This is not me being hurt feelings. These are people that are being immature with how they're handling the situation. I'm not calling them immature people, but how they're handling the situation, and their own spiritual authorities share my concern. So I'm not being inappropriate about this, and I'm not lying about this. But I will say this is an old schoolism. The idea that Subdeacon Daniel said that Craig told me in a private conversation that we hurt his feelings. It's just, one, not accurate. But here's, I think, the bigger problem, maybe not for you guys. The fact that if anything was said in the private conversation, that would come up publicly. That is something for me, that I'm totally against that. You don't get into, there's stuff that both he knows and I know about each other's private lives, which shouldn't be public. It's not because either of us did something wrong, but it's embarrassing what other people that we know have done. And so that should stay private. And it shouldn't be because of some intellectual disagreement that we start divulging personal details, because I just don't think an old school guy would do that. A man of his word would not do that. This newfangled world, I guess anything goes, but you know what? I could die at peace knowing that I'm not getting into that stuff and I'm not playing dirty. But here's the first thing, which is a little less offensive to me, because I just think nothing private should be divulged unless it's agreed to. Subdeacon Daniel invented the private comment. It's not even true. I didn't say they hurt my feelings. I think it's pretty clear in this video that I don't have hurt feelings. Privately, I said I was too old to be annoyed with their nonsense. I didn't want this to be stated publicly because of their sensitive consciences. And quite frankly, I don't like being annoyed. I don't want to go to bed at night and being annoyed about some nonsense somewhere. I just don't want to engage with it. So you know what? My weakness is I don't like being annoyed. I'm sorry. But I didn't want to go out and say this because I didn't want to offend them. So it wasn't my feelings hurt. I found them annoying. And that's what the conversation was about with Subdeacon Daniel. Now, I'm sorry I had to say that, but because he invented these details here and this private conversation became a matter of public concern, here's the truth, all right? So if you really like that, then, there you go. Now, do I have comments on Subdeacon? Because I've been collaborating for years, and I don't think he was being dishonest. I don't know where this came out of. That's why, for a sake of years of positive interactions, I have no comment. I'm not going to make too many presumptions because I just, you know what? I don't want to be angry about it. I don't want to guess about it. I'm just going to say he's wrong. And his spiritual father agrees with me. So I don't think I need to say more than that. I'm not going to guess why he said what he did and persist in precisely the activity that his spiritual father corrected both him and everyone on. That's between him and his spiritual father. I don't know. They want to bring me into that conversation. I'm all about blessed are the peacemakers. I'll bury whatever hatchets they may have. I don't have a hatchet. I want my own salvation, other people's salvation. That's why I do this. I've made mistakes too. So why am I not going to forgive Subdeacon Daniel or Adrian or anyone else for bad things they've done? I want to be forgiven. Are they going to have the same level of trust? Absolutely not. But it doesn't mean I have to be mad and hold a grudge. I can forgive people, and I think that's what we ought to be doing as Christians. So that's enough drama. Let's move on. I have no more comments about that. I don't think any more comments are useful. But let's talk about, again, the allegation, I'm very mean, but with hurt feelings. Now, they started getting very sensitive about my thumbnail. And I find that highly hypocritical. The thumbnail I was given and was made, I mean, it's accurate, as in the videos about that, right? Armenians have holy orders, Oriental Orthodox, the Ethiopians arguably have holy orders canonically, and the Syrian and Coptic Orthodox don't. I mean, if you look at what the thumbnail says, with the smiling and pleasant looking people on it, there's nothing there that's actually inaccurate. It's actually one of the few thumbnails that really, like, whoa, it's cool looking and actually sums up the whole video. You don't actually need to watch the whole video to know my point. It's in the thumbnail. And so that being said, mine's an informative and actually quite nice thumbnail. their thumbnail, being that I'm supposedly very mean for making this thumbnail and it's very disrespectful, and they put our patriarchs there, and a lot of these theatrics that it's supposedly so bad, is incoherent and spiteful, right? They put X's over these Eastern Orthodox patriarchs. On what basis? They don't have canonical holy orders? I don't know. It's just it's a satire of my thumbnail, which is fine because it doesn't hurt my feelings. But then you can't really pretend your feelings are hurt when you do the same thing and yours actually isn't even informative or coherent. And then to quote them, we reject any Melchite patriarchs. So if I were to say, I don't think the Oriental Orthodox have canonical holy orders, that is not offensive any more than saying we reject any Melchite patriarchs. It would just be, we agree in a principle, but from the opposite side. So again, this sort of, I'm very mean about the hurt feelings, all these theatrics. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I don't think it could make sense. Apologists need to do better. This idea where we're insulting people, personally attacking people, that we are making these spiteful thumbnails, these disrespectful thumbnails, saying disrespectful things. This is reprobate behavior that will send people to hell. This is serious stuff. And clergy cannot condone this. An agent claims his spiritual father condones it. And that's a screenshot of that, which I wasn't looking for, but I saw it randomly in Twitter and I was like, right in my face. And I won't get into more details about that. But I'll just say, this is horrible. No priest or bishop should be accepting this. And that includes the people on our side. This includes some of the comments the other Paul's making. He's got a bishop. No one should be accepting this behavior. This is not Christ-like. It turns the people away from Christ. The internet's a wide open mission field to people, all these countries that are unreached. You are going to send people to hell, and you're going to send yourself to hell. This is terrible. And the spiritual authorities that know this is going on, they know who they are going to be even more liable than some random YouTuber. So if I were to judge which side was correct by who had the smallest chip on their shoulder that wasn't doing all this reprobate behavior, I'd say it's probably the Protestants. They have their exceptions, and sadly, they've been growing worse. But the Christian witness is harmed, and this hurts missions. And I think like even a response video could have content and speak in a respectful manner about disagreement without the theatrics and disrespect, and way it looks no different than the world. Honestly, people disagreeing over sports teams and soccer hooligans act with more respect than Christian apologists. That is a crying, damnable shame. Damnable shame. Now, let's get into the idea that Melchites were violent, which is something that my original video actually talked about, so not something I actually disagree with. Eastern Orthodox, they claimed in this, in their video 2, were challenging us in the comments. They were like, can you actually cite your sources? We don't believe you. Here's a specific source. And this is only one of many. And this is a scholar, by the way. Like when we actually cite someone, it's not just our opinion. This is the scholar saying, so 30,000 in 1 hour were, murdered by the Chalcedonians. Right there. It shows a source on screen. Sarweris, Ash, HPPOTV, Fasciscule 124, 125, whatever that is. Now, there's problems with this. First, it follows no proper citation method. I mean, you never see citation like this in any academic book. You can't just throw into Google. It doesn't pop up on Amazon. It doesn't seem to be written by a scholar. It's a very strange citation. So that being said, if it can't easily be Googled or found, you're not doing your job in apologetics. It's not that I always use Turabian or Chicago or whatever, but at least if you actually put the name of my book into Google, it will come up, right? Because I'm trying to make it where it's useful and it serves the point of citation. This does not. So now I have to guess, what is the source? Now I'm guessing the source is Severus ibn al-Mukafa of the 10th century, who's a 10th century Coptic Orthodox bishop and apologist. And I'm guessing that PO stands for Petrologia Orientalis, tome instead of volume, V for volume 5, fascicule 1 as some manuscript cluster pertaining to Proderus of Alexandria. 124, 125 might be 124 to 5 or 124 to 5, right? I have to guess. And people ask what citation method I use. I don't use APA in my academic works. I actually use a St. Vlad style guide. So there you go. Now you know. So that being said, we don't believe you. Now here's the problem. Going by what I think is the most reasonable, because we have to guess, because this is not a known good citation of what this citation could be. It's not in PO volume 5. That's translation. It's on pages 24, 25. It's not on 124, 125. So this statement at the end of the TikTok video is just, you can't find this thing. It seems not to be a scholar. At best, with the fastest tool in the citation, it's maybe a 130-year-old translation from a scholar, and they just have the wrong page number there. That is the friendliest way I could spin this. So the possibilities that we have is that the citation is wrong. I mean, it's very possible. And that emphasizes the importance of common sense or professional citations. But also these days, sadly, that it's an AI hallucination and it's completely fake. And so for people wonder why don't you have, I'm not a guy with a massive bookshelf, because I actually read these things. A lot of my books are digital. That being said, it's when someone uses fake stuff and you contaminate the information environment with fake stuff from AI, that's a disservice to people who've done real work. And so this could have been an honest mistake. Maybe, like I said, maybe the citation could make sense if looked at some different way. But at best, this intercalator fails to inspire the trust of his critics. All right. So I don't think it's scholarship. And if it's not AI, it at best is a primary source from someone centuries removed from the events, right? A 9th century biased medieval chronicler. So the fact that he's trying to correct people saying we got our sources, and at best it's someone centuries removed who's biased. I just don't see this as a very cogent argument, which is why if you write this out and use a normal citation, it just wouldn't convince anyone. Good faith intercalators are necessary to weed through disinfo. So that's why in this video and in the original video, where I've made errors, I will point them out because I'm acting from good faith. Will they? I leave that to them. Now there's a larger problem, which is the massive digital bookshelf is still a massive bookshelf for Craig. There you go. The Discord cults and the disinfo campaigns. All right. That now we're dealing with people that want to win about theology. The idea where you even talk about winning is disgraceful. And they result to cult-like behavior and propaganda. Like if you look up the original word propaganda, what it meant. These information campaigns to manipulate people's thought. Propaganda is used to flood social media channels with disinformation. Like again, this citation that's not useful and stuff like that. This is a terrible development in polemics. This leads to information overload. People don't know even what's true or not anymore. They can't make informed faith decisions. And this is exacerbated by AI with fake citations, even if the one we just read isn't, because I don't know. There definitely is a problem with this. So more and more people need to depend upon brand names, which kind of stinks because the brand names, tend to be normies, James White, Trent Horn, I think I've finally got enough cred where even if I'm wrong, all right, Craig actually is doing due diligence here. You got to deal with brand names because they have transparency and integrity of their sources. Any Johnny come lately with this stuff that comes randomly on a Discord server, we already dealt with agent dealing scholars gave these translations of the bishop, what's it, Protus, who was the one in Constantinople, Proclus of Constantinople, and that comes out, no, it's just AI translations from a server from Discord members. That becomes a problem because then you need that person to trust what they're providing you, to have integrity, or to at least be very open, right? Very open. Here's where I got it. It's wrong. Here's the right thing. And that's fine too. So that being said, more and more people need to depend upon those brand names. And as follows an example of a comment that was repasted in multiple videos, which shows you this is a concerted disinformation campaign. Right? Because it's just not someone writing their feelings. They're then copying, pasting it, and bringing it elsewhere. So I'll make it bigger to make it somewhat readable. He claims, says, first off, the three bishops weren't present argument is an old recycled claim that's been debunked for centuries. Pope Timothy II, Hilarious, was consecrated by actual Egyptian bishops, along with St. Peter the Iberian, right in Alexandria. This happened with overwhelming popular support, in church law, the voice of people is a primary source of legitimacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the first claim is Hilarious consecration was debunked. He doesn't provide a source, it's debunked. He actually doesn't provide a source for anything. But again, I suppose the tone of the reply is supposed to convince you. And he appeals to this being popular. Again, no proof. And he says there's at least three bishops. He doesn't address the larger meat of the actual video, Jacob Bardai and direct jurisdiction. So it's kind of like this non sequitur that's not cited, meant to discredit me, so that way you don't deal with the actual cited and correct information. So that being said, my argument is that the bishops present were not from the Egyptian synod, and the metropolitan needs a majority of the synod. That's my actual argument. And the Cambridge edition of Early Christian Writings, Volume 4, 2022, so it's not some archaic open source thing, treats different two-man claim, different bishops from a different jurisdiction, only two of them, seriously, and is a real source. So like I actually cite my source. It is a real source. I'll make it bigger so you could read it. They chose Timothy, who was consecrated a rival bishop of March 16th, 457, possibly only two bishops, and thus irregularly, since three bishops are required for canonical ordination as bishop. This led to an outbreak of violence in Alexandria, which culminated in Proderus being lynched by an anti-Chalcedonian mob on March 19th, 457. So clearly Proderus is already bishop, and then he's violently murdered. The popular Timothy thus became the uncontested bishop of Alexandria, though not without suspicions of involvement in the death of his predecessor. So that being said, I'm not being crazy here. This is mainstream scholarship says this. It could be wrong. I'm not saying, scholars always right. It's just I'm not being, what's the word? I'm not being negligent with the sources. I'm doing due diligence here. So should we engage with e-cults and AI slop propaganda? Should we engage with those things? And honestly, no. But should the spiritual fathers who know who they are, who bless this activity, put an end to it? Absolutely. Because guess whose head is going to roll in the afterlife, and it's going to be yours. So I don't want that on my conscience. I'm repenting things I've done wrong. And I think we all have to do a lot of repentance. But in this case, I'm in the right. Now, I want to end this video. I'll do only a few audience questions because I just don't want to belabor this. I want to keep this kind of short and succinct so it's helpful to people. St. Athanasius quotes this quote from Pope Julius, and he quotes it approvingly. And I think it is telling about problems on both their sides, but why the problems for their side are existential compared to the Eastern Orthodox side. All right. Athanasius quotes Julius, "For what canon of the church or what apostolical tradition warrants this, that when a church was at peace and so many bishops were in unanimity with Athanasius, that the bishop of Alexandria, Gregory, should be sent there, a stranger to the city, not having been baptized there, nor known to the general body, and desired neither by presbyters nor bishops nor laity, that he should be appointed at Antioch and sent to Alexandria, accompanied not by presbyters, nor by deacons of the city, nor by bishops of Egypt, but by soldiers, even supposing that Athanasius was in the position of a criminal after the council. This appointment ought not to have been made thus illegally and contrary to the rule of the church, but the bishops of the province ought to have ordained one in that very church, of that priesthood, of that very clergy, and the canons received from the apostles ought not thus to be set aside. Had this offense been committed against any one of you, would you not have exclaimed against it and demanded justice as far as the transgression of the canons?" Right? So I'm not being different than Pope Julius here, talking about these canons. But I will admit, because I want to be honest here, this quote poses all of us difficulties. It calls into question later ordinations unless, right? So we could start trying to give excuses because all of us have done this. Unless one, the use of military police can be argued as legitimate or not. against mobs. So, for example, if there's mob violence, why shouldn't soldiers put that down? So, for Oriental Orthodox, or actually, because they didn't exist yet, non-Chalcedonian bishop Theodosius of Alexandria was imposed by military force against the Julianists. All right. And so they don't reject the use of military force. Again, that doesn't make it right. That's not my point. But the point is not a problem for them. All right. The consecration of a foreigner can be legitimate canonically if the local synod accepts the choice. So, yeah, I mean, that definitely reeks of hanky panky. But if the local synod accepts it, I mean, is it a big deal? It's sort of like the Greeks that become bishops in Jerusalem. The local Palestinians are totally fine with this, and they've been for years. There's, in fact, a good book from Holy Trinity Press on exactly that question. And so, I mean, it's not ideal, but is it a deal breaker? No. And we all deal with this sometimes. I mean, they did. And we do too. The say of the lower clergy and people is ideal, right? You don't want someone opposed and there's no consent of the people. I actually think that is highly problematic. But it's not explicitly canonically regulated in its expression. So how do we know the proper way for people to accept it? Because it's not regulated, we could essentially, well, people eventually go along with it, and I guess it's right. Or I think in the case of the Byzantine state, the government reflects the will of the people, or they'd overthrow the government, right? Which actually did happen in certain portions of the country. So the fact that there is some level of consent, and it does pertain to the authority people allow to be imposed beyond above them and things like that, where it's not a total deal breaker, though of course it's not good. And I think the more distant and more legalistic we get, we're saying, yeah, the people totally accepted it, the more problems we will have in the church. So I'm not here justifying it, but I think all of us except 1, 2, 3 are really not deal breakers, though they're not ideal, and God surely doesn't like them. Now, number 4, the synod need not be involved if they are heretics. Now, Chalcedonians don't say this, but ultimately the non-Chalcedonians have to say this, right? What Julius says isn't a problem as long as the synod need not be involved if everyone there is a heretic. Here is the problem. Unlike the first 3, the canons are silent for those, but not the 4th thing, right? The canons are explicit. The synod is necessary, and without it, the consecration is invalid. So this is why I could say, without any problem whatsoever, that the Oriental Orthodox have no canonical holy orders. There's nothing crazy here. That's we just proved it out. Now, that being said, we have canonical vagaries, like for those first 3 things we just covered, and there isn't on the necessity of synodical and patriarchal input to prevent invalidity. And so while there's vagaries and stuff that's not ideal, there is absolutely no vagary whatsoever, nor vagary in the interpretation of these canons of invalidity for those who are made bishop without the synod. The Ethiopians are still operating under this idea today. So I'm not God to discern the grace in their holy orders. That's not the point of the video. I ended the video on that point. I think I started the video on that point. So whatever justification people think they have for attacking me because I'm supposedly attacking the very integrity of their church, I leave that to God. I'm just talking about their holy orders. But I will pose you this because I am a Chalcedonian. I am Eastern Orthodox. I joined this church for a very specific reason, because they are not schismatic, and it is damnable to be schismatic. And those who follow those and go into schism are schismatic according to St. Ignatius. And there is no reform whatsoever that could be attained worth having through schism, as St. Irenaeus says. I can affirm all those things as an Eastern Orthodox. I can't affirm that as Oriental Orthodox, Protestant, or Roman Catholic. So I just pose you this because I'm not going to God. I'm not God, and I'm not going to judge whether they have a valid Eucharist or valid holy orders. So canonically say neither. I could say, is it worth taking a chance? I pose that to you. Do you want to take the chance of your salvation with that? They said themselves, it's the reason why we reject any and all instances of Melkite patriarchs. That's their words. They didn't correct him on it. That's their words. They say that we don't have valid holy orders, but canonically, it's them who don't have holy orders. And so canonically, we have every right to reject it. Do you want to take the chance of your salvation on that. I leave that to you. And so I want to add a postscript here. Chalcedonian triumphalism is unjustified, right? The point of this video is to say how great we are and how awful they are. This is a tragic situation. Schisms in the church is tragic. That's why Satan sowed these schisms, so that way less people are saved. Both sides were unchristian. Islam was a judgment from God, in my opinion. The Oriental Orthodox and East Orthodox have the same conceptual theology. Like, I really don't think the Oriental Orthodox conceptually are eutychians. And I don't think that the Chalcedonians are Nestorians, because Nestorius actually believed in adoptionism. So this should not be grounds for schism. And for what it's worth, Agent's spiritual father agrees with me 100% on this. He actually sent me one of the videos that became, I called the video Top Shelf Christology, with a Coptic Orthodox bishop that he sent me because he really agreed with that bishop's formulation of how we believe the same thing from the agreed upon statements. Now, I'm not saying you have to agree with that or agree with me or agree with Agent's spiritual father, but treating me like I'm a nut or I'm wrong when your own confessor believes that seems to me ill-advised. So that said, I think another thing for us to be aware of is that the more distance from the scriptures we get, which is why I started this with the scriptures, the more obtruse and useless the debate becomes, right? Like the people that debate on the, is it a divine hypostasis? Is it a composite hypostasis? Is it a divine only hypostasis? Is it composite only? There's no way it's divine. Like, no one could follow this. And there's a reason why it's useless, because the scriptures really don't weigh in on this. Now, I have an opinion on the matter, but there's a reason why I don't want to choke people over it, because it's not something that the scriptures compel us to believe is so ultra important, and the church hasn't settled, is so ultra important that it requires getting super angry over. The doctrine, to be correct, must have a direct tie-in to the spiritual life and salvation, right? So these more obscure matters don't, but I believe Diotheletism does, which is that video on Top Shelf Christology gets into considerable detail, right? The idea that there isn't a doctrine of gnomic will within non-Chalcedonianism because they don't have these distinctions about nature, will, and energies, to me is very highly problematic and affects the spiritual life. It affects how we understand demonic temptations, how we turn from temptations, what we ought to be confessing. There's a direct spiritual tie-in. If you can't think of a direct spiritual tie-in, chances are you're just barking up a useless tree. If not worse, you are wrangling over words to the detriment of your own salvation and others. Chalcedonian terminology is helpful. It's endorsed by Ephesus. It's not grounds of violence in schism. It's used, as we showed by St. Ambrose. And so was it worth it? Was this argument over a Christology that conceptually is really no different between us, whose terminology predates Chalcedon and is accepted by Ephesus, was that worth a schism? I obviously don't think so. Obviously don't think so. And that's why I could talk about this dispassionately and not get all angry about it, because I'm actually concerned about my own and other people's salvation, not about ego. Now, before we do audience questions, if this has blessed you, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember, missionary work. Anyone who believes but is not a missionary has not yet known the beauty of faith, according to Blessed Valeru Gafencu. You can support the missionary work in Cambodia at orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Below is Patreon. Please, just $5 a month makes a big difference. Larger donations are always appreciated. There's Venmo. If you want to do this one time only, Venmo, or obviously PayPal. Even $1 makes a difference. $100, $1,000, even better. But if this has blessed you, please bless a church in Cambodia. I'm not taking super chat money. I answer your questions for free. I'm not building up big platform here. I'm just trying to support good missionary work. And I will add one missionary update. We have created an AI model that is translating Khmer that is geometrically improving. I'm hoping by the time August is over that this thing will be pretty much perfect by what our standards are today. We'll just become pickier. And so we'll be able to translate Christian works into the Khmer language like it's never been done before. No donation was needed for this. This is just something I need your prayer for. But such a great missionary update. But we do need missionaries. We do need money. So please support the missionary work. PayPal below, Venmo below, Patreon below, but consider becoming a missionary. Orthomission.com. Become a missionary, and we will hook you up with a mission. So please consider that. Now, that being said, I will do only a few audience questions and comments. Someone says, no chance anymore of conversation, Daniel and Ajan. And I will, by all means, have a conversation with Subdeacon Daniel because I have a history with him. Sadly, I just don't have a positive enough history to have a public conversation with Ajan. His spiritual father has wanted me and him to talk privately, and I was open to it. That hasn't occurred, so I'm guessing he's not. So that ball's in his court. We have Craig. If you need the acceptance of the metropolitan to install a bishop, what do we take of Proterus, who didn't have that? Proterus was the patriarch. You need the acceptance of a synod. So I just think maybe you're a little confused there, but he did have the acceptance of all the other canonical patriarchs, which is what patriarchs need from a patriarch. We have this. If you make people laugh at and feel superior to whoever you're arguing against, then you'll get at least a handful of people to agree with you, whether you're right or wrong. So sadly, that will attract people in a worldly way, but will look no different than the world. Then what's our reward in heaven? We'll have a reward, but it'll be in hell. And I don't want that for anyone. We need weekly streams, Craig. You want me to do quality stuff? Then I can do it weekly. I've got peer-reviewed articles I'm working on, a novel manuscript I'm sending out, stuff like this video was made for like almost 2 months now. And I just couldn't do it because I had to finish up this AI program and a dictionary for the Khmer language. And so it's like, I'm busy doing actual missionary work. And so I got a full-time job. So I'll do as much content as I can that's quality, that helps and edifies people. We have Craig has become an ortho bro. I'm guessing that's sarcasm. I'm guessing I'm one, too old, and two, really don't have the temperament to act like a jerk towards people. Craig, great work. What would you say are the main differences between Oriental and Eastern Orthodox, and what are the main kill shots Eastern Orthodox have against Oriental Orthodox? I mean, obviously, theological vocabulary. Obviously, I think the ethos of an average Eastern Orthodox service is more traditional. The Oriental Orthodox have some charismatic elements. They got LCD screens and stuff. Again, I'm not going to claim it's the end of the world, but Eastern Orthodox for now are definitely more traditional. But there's things where the Oriental Orthodox definitely are better. Men and women at separate sides of the church. I'm guessing also with head coverings, so I don't remember that particularly. Their monasticism is much more authentic. And so they have great things too. I would like nothing more than for them to reconcile the Eastern Orthodox Church, because I think we'd gain a lot from them. We have, I've always had a high level of appreciation and respect for Craig too. I don't know who that responds to, but thank you, Nathaniel. Craig, how dare you point out someone else's ad homs? You are so mean. Or how dare I have a disagreement? That's mean. I liked when Ajan apologized to Subdeacon Kek's outbursts about cleave to antiquity. I'm guessing it's getting to drama stream stuff. I have no comment. Maybe it was appropriate. I got no clue. Craig, you could be Ajan's godfather. I could be a mentor. I don't have to agree with anyone. Like I remember when what's his name, Muhammad Ibrahim, or he was someone who debated on my channel against David Erhan years ago. I was very supportive of the young man. Keep studying and keep learning. You're very smart. You're obviously a very smart fella. So I'm supportive of people I disagree with. I don't have a chip on my shoulder about that. I don't think I'm going to become his godfather or something like that. But I wish him nothing but the best. So may God bless him. We have, didn't Theodora hand out lollipops to Monophysites? I know that's being figurative, but I don't think so. We covered that in the original video. So check out Non-Chalcedonian Schism, a History, and you'll get more details. In the works, Theophany works. And yes, there's a upcoming book on the Ninth Ecumenical Council by Theophany Works, God willing, published this year. And who knows, maybe more. I don't know. But check out theophanyworks.com. I mean, the most gorgeous icons. That's their icon of St. Patrick. Just unbelievable. And they do prayer books and other great things. They are an excellent resource, and soon, God willing, one of my books. We have Craig. Do you think the Christian East been more repentant and done like the Ninevites, Islam would not exist. Absolutely. I think faithlessness in Russia led to the communists. I think all these things have spiritual knock-on effects. Women not wearing head coverings. I'm not going to pretend to end the world. But have you noticed stuff starts slipping when people don't have fidelity to faith? Men and women on separate sides of church. You stop having the fidelity to faith and the practice of the apostles, stuff starts to slip. Lack of Christian charity, stuff starts to slip. All these things are connected. And that's why we got to focus on our own holiness or repentance and not just being right. It's good to be right. But I've noticed because people don't want to get the moral house in order, they only care about being right. But there's no love. And without love, I am nothing, says St. Paul. So I don't want that for people. I don't want them to be nothing. Let's see. We have sarcasm about Arthur Bro. Someone asked, would he become Protestant again? Absolutely not. This actually came up in a debate I had with Pastor Samuel Farag, where he said, if you found out you're wrong, would you change your mind? I said, no. I said, I'd go to confession and just keep going to church. I wouldn't have this YouTube channel, but that's the answer to that question. Someone said, Craig, what would you say would be your number one go-to catechism from the first 5 centuries? I mean, I think the only real catechism then is Cyril of Jerusalem's. But I will say for Cambodia, the first one we'll translate will be St. Philaret's longer catechism. So that being said, I'm not going to belabor this longer. I really hope this video has blessed you, and may God bless Subdeacon Daniel Kakis, Agen, Simply Schismatic, whatever the name was, all the other people. And again, if there's anything I say done to hurt your feelings, that clearly was not my intent. I feel bad about that. So may God bring reconciliation. May God improve the information space, that not be full of a bunch of drama and ad hominems and misinformation and possibly fake quotes or very troublesome citations. And that being said, may we do this with the right intentions and right motivations and really seek to edify people. So I'll end this show as I end all of them by quoting Jesus Rock, fight to death for the truth. The Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.